Hi students, this is Mr. Eckert and we're going to go through targets 3 and 4 of this Intro to Biology unit. Target 3 says that you should be able to identify the parts of a microscope and then you should know their basic functions. Target 4 says that you should be able to demonstrate that you can use a microscope properly. Now I do want to let you know that on the test over this unit, for target 3, that of course, I will give you on the test a blank microscope and you'll have to write in, label different parts, and you should know what each of those parts does, what their function is. So that part's going to be, of course, written. But target 4 says that you should be able to demonstrate that you can use a microscope properly. So for that part, I'm going to have each one of you, one at a time, go up to a microscope that'll be in the room while you're taking the test. And you'll have to get something that I have on a microscope slide in focus under low power, medium power, and high power. So for that reason, it's really important that when you have an opportunity during this first unit to use the microscope, you're going to be in a small group. What often happens is maybe one person is very comfortable with using a microscope, has used them before, so they kind of take charge and may even tend to dominate that time. But you want to make sure that each person in your group, including yourself, gets time to actually use the microscope, that you know how to move the slide around, focus the image, get it in focus under low, medium, and high power, because you're going to have to demonstrate that during test time. All right, so here's a basic microscope. This is what's called a compound light microscope. It uses light to help us to see the image, as opposed to something like an electron microscope that uses electrons. And the microscopes that we will be using in class look very similar to this. You can see it's actually got 3 different lenses that you can use and revolve around what's called a nose. So you can use this image here to label your diagram. There's also microscopes in the book, and of course you can find microscopes online, as well as other resources I've put in Schoology to help you fill in these blanks. But as you take some time to fill them in, this part right here is just called the body tube. So at the end of it, it holds an eyepiece or ocular lens, and it's going to help focus the light through that lens. This is a revolving nose piece, and I think you do want to write down revolving nose piece and not just nose piece, because the revolving part tells you that it turns around, and you can change and interchange these different lenses depending on what power you want to look through the microscope. So the shortest lens, and I think it's kind of hard to tell from this photograph which of these is the shortest, but on a real microscope you'd be able to tell one is definitely shorter, and that's the low power objective lens. So it will magnify the image the least out of the 3, and your microscope might have 4 lenses. Some of them do, but most of them will have 3. But the low power is always the shortest lens. Then you have a medium power lens, and that of course is going to be in between in terms of its distance or depth between the low and the high powered lens. And the high powered lens, which gives you, of course, maximum magnification. You have stage clips, and these you should use to hold the microscope slide down. Sometimes somebody can bump the microscope accidentally, and if you have the stage clips holding the slide down, then you're not going to possibly move the image out from where you want it to be. Underneath the stage, you're either going to have something that looks like this, which is called a condenser, or you'll have a little dial and the end of it will stick out right here, and you'll be able to turn it. That's called a diaphragm if you have the dial. This is the condenser. They both do the same thing. They both change the amount of light that's passing through the image or the slide. So if you do have a diaphragm, I would encourage you on your microscope to flip it upside down carefully so that you can see the diaphragm, and you'll see that it consists of a series of holes that have different different diameters. So that's how it's controlling how much light is passing through the image. Down here is the illuminator, or you can just call it the light, and without that it would of course be very hard to see the image. This is the eyepiece or ocular lens. The eyepiece on all of these microscopes, the eyepiece or ocular lens, magnifies 10 times. And so to get the total magnification, you're always multiplying 10, which is the ocular magnification, times whatever each of these lenses magnifies. So if you're using the high-powered lens, for example, you'll see a large number 40 on the outside of the lens. So 40 times 10 is 400, and that would mean you're seeing the image through the eyepiece at 400 times bigger than its actual size. The low-powered lens has a 4 on it. So again, 4 times 10 would be a total magnification of 40. So magnifying it 40 times the actual size. This is called the arm of the microscope, and whenever you're moving the microscope, you'll have one hand on the arm and one hand underneath down here. The stage is of course what holds the microscope slide in place along with the stage clips, and the stage you'll see will move up and down as you change the focus. The coarse focus knob, when you turn this, you'll actually physically be able to see the stage moving up and down. And then you have a fine focus knob, which also moves the stage, but you won't be able to physically see it moving because it's moving at much smaller intervals. So one very, very important thing to keep in mind when you are using these different lenses, when you're using the high-powered lens, if the object is in focus, you'll notice that this lens, the end of it, is right just above the glass slide. In fact, to some students it may look like it's actually touching it. So when you're using high power, you never want to use the coarse focus knob. You always want to use only the fine focus knob. The reason for that is that if you forget and use the coarse focus, you're going to move this stage very rapidly, and you may move it up into the lens, and that can crack not only of course the glass slide but also the lens itself. And of course the most important or the most expensive part of the microscope are the lenses, and the most expensive lens is this high-powered objective lens. So make sure whenever you're using high power, you're only using this fine focus knob and you're never using the coarse focus knob. If you have trouble getting something in focus on high power using the fine focus, and you've been trying for several minutes and can't get it to focus, then the best thing to do is always go back to medium power, and then you can use the coarse focus, or even low power, and then go back up until you finally get to the high powered lens. Finally, this is the base, and as I said earlier, if you're ever moving the microscope, you want to have one hand on the arm, one hand underneath the base. So again, the best way for you to learn how to use the microscope is to actually practice in lab. And again, I would encourage you when you're in lab to make sure each person in your lab group, which is usually going to be a group of 3, gets roughly equal time on the microscope so that you know how to use it. And if you have any questions at all, make sure you ask.